Sam, thank you again for joining us. You are a global news reporter. You have spent, I think, much of your career out west, but you are now based in Ottawa. You are focused on corruption, political corruption, crime, white collar crime, foreign influence, national security, among other things. You are the author of Wilful Blindness, which is the reason why I asked you to be on here. And thank you for joining us. Have I missed anything that would be pertinent for people to know?
No, in terms of my background and my current relevance, I think you've hit all the notes. I would say that, first of all, thank you so much for having me, and I do think you're in good company. I've spoken so far to prosecutors actively looking at some of the cases I've referred to in the book. That is, in an official capacity, I've spoken to them about my findings and sort of big picture thoughts on what could and should change. I'm due to speak to, I won't say which agencies in the United States or which I have spoken to yet, but I can tell you that I do think on an international level, the governments of Ottawa, the United States, and in fact, China are very interested in this book.
Well, that's fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about the book. I tend to be a housing bear or real estate bear, and your book caught my attention because one of the components of it, you're talking about the Chinese government, you're talking about the drug trade, you're talking about money laundering, and how these things intermix largely in Canada, though, I guess, but more globally as well. And then how this has funneled things like Vancouver housing markets has pushed the prices way up. So your book is very extensive, and I doubt we'll have time to go over all of it. But maybe just quickly, could you walk through what the Vancouver model is, the sort of the premise of what is happening in Vancouver that you are zeroed in on?
For sure. And if it will assist, I think I have a passage that after I talk a little bit directly from the book that I think will highlight some extremely important points that do interest certain people in the US government, Ottawa, and probably China in a certain way. But look, I'll start with two statistics that everyone in finance, anyone in real estate, law, indeed anyone in government in Canada should be very concerned about. My book points to one casino money laundering network criminal busted in Burnaby in 2016. His Pathfinder had buckets of NPP, that is the precursor for fentanyl, equivalent to a couple of buckets. I estimated based on other cases that could turn into about $570 million in fentanyl pills. That's one bust of one gangster very associated to violence, associated to gun shops, weapons trafficking, to dial-a-dopers, the Red Scorpions, but much more importantly, associated based in China, casinos, and weapons trafficking, and of course, fentanyl trafficking. Beyond that case, I found what I termed a super facilitator. This is just a BC business person who purported to be a business person, but in fact was charged or accused by the RCMP of importing 85 tons of chemical precursors, some for fentanyl, some methamphetamines and other drugs. So I can't tell you how much fentanyl that would produce, but it would, I'm told, equate to massive quantities. We're talking enough to kill Canada's population a number of times over. That may sound like an extreme statement, but I'll take you to the case that I didn't cover in my book, but that came out shortly after my book was released. Some of your listeners may be familiar. A Port Coquitlam super lab was busted. Police said that they found the equivalent of fentanyl precursors that could produce roughly enough in a month to kill 30 million Canadians in fentanyl pills if this is produced, right, and distributed. Of course, drug traffickers don't want to kill their end user, but these are toxic pills that could equate to 30 million deaths in a month. And I calculate that's about 1.5 billion in profits. So that is monthly, one super lab. Where is all the fentanyl precursor coming from? This relates very much to the Vancouver model. Probably about 90% known to connect to factories mostly in southern China, many in Wuhan. The Vancouver model essentially is how drug cash is moved around the world by these underground criminal networks I've exposed in the book. The book was sensational for showing how casino crime fit into this Vancouver model. And so I'll just give you two pieces here. Essentially, the Vancouver model is the Macau model. It is how ultra wealthy Chinese nationals get their capital out of China when they face a barrier of 50,000 export each year. Traditionally, they went to Macau, where they would either put a deposit with a drug gang connected to banking accounts in China and get paid out in Macau by these casino gangsters. They gamble, they get their chips, they get their checks, and then they can then export the cash that comes out of the casino to the world. But really, the Vancouver model exported that model into Canada. The very same extremely powerful criminal gangs active in Macau, China, and Hong Kong that facilitated the Macau casinos now, at a certain level, I assert, are running BC casinos, most especially the Richmond Casino. They run the VIP rooms, or the ultra wealthy nationals that come to Canada and gamble there. They facilitate them with drug cash. And so how it works is, again, you make a contract to meet a loan shark in a Richmond casino. You've made the contract in China and Macau saying, I want to receive 200,000 to gamble. Someone meets you in a parking lot, gives you that cash, and the casino essentially lets you buy in with that cash, which is easily determined on indicators to be drug cash, but no one at the casino stops it. You can gamble, and if you've got a good night, you get a check out of the casino, or you turn the $20 in a Gucci bag into $100 bills that you cash out with. What maybe you won, maybe you lost most, but you're taking money or a check out of the casino, and that goes into real estate. The other thing that's important, I'll finish here. What's important to know is that very often the contract was you don't put money down in China and get paid out in Richmond. You simply fly into Canada and you are fronted a drug cash loan in a hockey bag. You gamble and you pay back that debt obligation in China, and it goes directly into the drug trafficker's bank. So this is, you can see how the loop is established where this is funding imports of fentanyl precursors into Canada that, of course, it's pressed up in labs like the one in Port Coquitlam, sold, the cash is collected, loaned back to these ultra wealthy nationals from other countries, and paid back elsewhere. So on a simple level, it gets more complex, but that's the Vancouver model.
Okay, so because I think a lot of people who will be listening to this won't necessarily be quite as up on the money laundering component of this and why it's working. And the only reason I am is because I'm a financial advisor, and so I've been doing anti-money laundering training for, I don't know, 16, 17 years. But the principle is this: we have billionaires in China who would like to go and gamble in Macau or maybe into places like Vancouver out of the watchful gaze of the CCP. Is that fair? And we have as well gangsters who are triads, criminal elements, who are also producing mass quantities of money in drug and drug related sales. And the two of them have basically the opposite problem. The billionaires can't move the money out of China to go and gamble, and the drug guys can't move the money into China, and they need to launder it to make it look legitimate. And the interaction here is in the BC casinos. So the billionaire comes to Canada, he is loaned money that is drug money from a triad, and he's paying whatever the premium is on that. And he gambles with it, pays it back either in China, which is laundering it for them and placing the money for them in China. Yep. And it's laundered here through the casinos so that the money can continue to flow in North America or be used for legitimate purposes like buying property or anything like that as part of the proceeds. Is that a fair summary?
That's absolutely correct. It's, it's an equilibrium transaction. There's a need on both sides. And just so people listening don't get the sense that this is sort of cobbled together, I'll just read you, as FinTrack puts it in the bullet 44 exhibit I've listed in my documents I put in my book that I obtained from the Cullen Commission records. Bottom line, what is going on? Real estate is not the only problem. Bullet 2, demand exists on both sides. Bullet, organized crime has lots of cash. Bullet, need to move it out of Canada. Bullet, Chinese citizens have access to cash. Bullet, limit of 50K restricts their ability to spend. Conclusion, leads to development of services. So that's essentially what you said in a few bullet points.
So, and people should be aware of this too. The Cullen Commission is an existing commission right now. Is that correct?
Right. The Cullen Commission is tasked to look into whether regulatory failure, corruption, inadequacies in police, government, all agencies allowed this money laundering to take such a deep root in BC's economy, especially casinos and real estate. And Commissioner Austin Cullen is due to come back with his findings after about 2 years of hearings. Should be in December coming up, but we're also going to hear from 2 more witnesses. One very important, Ross Alderson, the former BC Lottery Corporation anti-money laundering director, who happened to be a major source of the material in my book. So I'm looking forward to hear what he has to say.
Okay, so like I say, there's so much to cover here, and we obviously need to keep moving forward, but we need to bring everyone with us. So let's just backtrack a little bit, because BC obviously hasn't always been this hotbed of, or what is you outline in the book, why it's become this source of money laundering and crime, being as a vector for all this to go through. 2 big things have happened. One is that in the 90s, policies regarding immigration and refugees changed. And the second is that the government started to open up the gambling limits inside casinos as a method to try and capture more Chinese tourism, gambling tourism. Is that about right?
Those are both part of it. I would go even broader. There's huge geopolitical ramifications to China retaking Hong Kong in the late 90s. There was a massive flow of many great people wanting to get away from the CCP. But within that flow, as I covered in my book, a very significant, especially in the wealthy investor categories of immigration, a very dangerous and powerful component of gangsters and tycoons. And as I write in the book, many of them able to corrupt pretty much any institution they come near to in Canada, and also in some cases working with the Chinese Communist Party. So you were right. I would add that. I would also add that, late 80s, early 90s, of course, in British Columbia, it's all about the gateway to the Asia Pacific. Everyone was seeing dollar signs in their eyes with the Tycoons coming over from Hong Kong. Of course, Expo 86 was a major landmark in sort of what BC was going to become, this new hub of international trade. But as I write in my book, and I really don't believe, I'm not trying to be cocky, but I don't believe anyone can honestly argue with the evidence. In that international trade, some of the biggest players were known gangsters who infiltrated Canada's system. And in fact, this was known. So those would be some of the major factors.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the internationalness of these gangsters, because I assume somewhat normal Canadian. I don't really know that. All my knowledge of the black market and stuff comes from movies, so it's not super reliable. Your book starts naming people, and you have photos of people who are, who you identify as being part of these criminal triads, but they're not some guy in the back room of a bar, although periodically they may be. They have a very public face. Yes. You talk about a couple of names that come forward. It's like one is Betty Yan, who is repeatedly mentioned in the book, right up until her untimely end, I guess assassinated in a parking lot.
Outside a gambling parlor in Richmond, yeah.
Outside of gambling parlor in Richmond. She is implicated early on as, I think, being part of a loan sharking thing. It's her. She's on trial. It's quite public, and she's implicated in the testimony. But it doesn't seem to affect her status in Vancouver. And you point out, she has children and she helps bring international students to a school where our current prime minister is actually the teacher. Um,
That's right. Yeah.
it's the incredible thing in the book is just how often we have pictures of politicians, sometimes the politicians themselves very early on in your book, but politicians shaking hands with businessmen who are leaders of triads operating out of BC.
Yes, and I really think it's apt that you said, as a Canadian, a lot of your knowledge came from movies. I'm a Scorsese fan, and I think that, no, I think this is a point that I'd like to make. People like Scorsese, De Niro, Joe Pesci, they get it so right. If you look at, The Last Epic, that 4-hour movie about another take on the Hoffa death, look, these people have studied, they talked to the real gangsters that got taken down due to the RICO Act. That is absolutely accurate depiction of Italian mafia organized crime in those movies. So we know the facts, but my contention, my assertion is that Asian organized crime is much more sophisticated, much more widespread, much more powerful, and it needs to become known really on a popular level through the facts. Hopefully my book is turning a page on that where, these guys are so powerful, so connected in Southeast Asia without any exaggeration. Again, some of the people in United States agencies I'm talking to are very interested about some of these people in my book and their connections to high-level militaries in Southeast Asia, high-level officials. So this is what Canadians and really people, gatekeepers in finance, need to understand, that Asian organized crime, it's I'm told, and I now know, it's so sophisticated, so corporate, so business-like, and yet so misunderstood in North America, that element where it very easily interacts with lawyers, accountants, bankers, and you do see people that come off as if they're a statesman-like banker, and yet the files that I look at or obtain from the RCMP and CSIS say that they are connected to or even could be the leaders of very powerful drug trafficking cartels.
Okay, so this is one thing that I think we need to now explain, because you highlight as well that there's a deep connection between these cartels and gangs and the Chinese Communist Party, which is not necessarily how I think most people, or again myself, would think about, typically Soviet or communist dictatorships tend to have a real hard hand against this drug trafficking and criminal elements. They're a threat sometimes to the organization of that society. But your book outlines that there's big overlap here, that they're all taking a slice out of this, including the person who is, I think it's Guangzhou is the province where Lai
Changxing.
Lai Changxing is from. And the person who was who was the governor of that province is his name was, I think, Xi Jinping.
Strangely enough, just the guy named Xi Jinping. So look, Lai Changxing had a little business called the Red Palace in Fujian. Lai Changxing is an extremely important figure to understand what I'm talking about. And in fact, I learned of greater corroboration of, my assessments of Lai Changxing's role after the book came out. His networks are involved in smuggling anything that will make money worldwide, including drugs and weapons. But indeed, yes, he does that, or he did that, through corrupting high-level officials in China, perhaps all the way to the top, through a sort of a client type relationship where he is allowed to do his business if he will do certain jobs for the Chinese Communist Party. And that those include, according to reports I've now obtained, oil smuggling networks that would run oil into North Korea, so that, you can easily see where China and North Korea have some sort of hidden business arrangements where China can't be the one that is running resources into that country, but other people very close to China can. And so Lai Changxing, I'll finish up here, but someone like Lai Changxing can be a tycoon, a narco, and a CCP agent all at once. My book talks about the network of those actors and how they work together to common ends. But as you said, in an authoritarian state with the power and the level of surveillance of China, if someone if Z, let's just say right to the top, wants someone in jail, or I'm sorry to say dead, it can happen very easily. If he doesn't, then it won't happen. And so very powerful people involved in organized crime can be free to do what they want within certain limits that are allowed. And also they have to give back what is demanded of them in the relationship.
So the triads, and I think you had a quote from the previous president as well of China saying that sometimes the triads can be quite patriotic. They're functioning as a soft power and black ops maybe, but they're able to move money illegally or quietly and giving plausible deniability to the government. So that's their kind of their role and why they've got an interaction. But then, of course, there's also a client relationship too. Money flows back and forth between those groups.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more about Lai Changxing. Lai Changxing.
If we were trying to be correct, I might try to say Lai Chang Sing.
Okay.
Or they would even say Lai Chan Sing if you're trying to be more Cantonese, but there you go.
So his name, he's locked up now permanently in China, is I believe the situation.
Locked up or dead. It's not exactly clear every day, but I'm told one or the other.
But he shows up in Canada, like a lot of these guys. He walks into the country with almost no problem whatsoever. He got, I think, his documentation. He tried to get it through Hong Kong, but there was people sniffing around, so he went through LA to get paperwork. Or am I thinking the wrong guy?
That would be another lie.
You had so many names in here. I know there's so many. There's so many people you name.
That's one thing people tell me. If there's a second edition, there's going to be a little bit of editing to help out with some of those naming situations and recognition. But that's another lie. Lai Tan Sang, who's the head of the water room triad, another very important figure.
Good Lord. Okay. I'm trying to keep it all together. I think the gist of what I was going for is that, you highlight that some of these guys show up in Canada. CSIS is watching them. Our security forces know about them, but they come into Canada through a kind of weird loophole where they just dump their passports in the washroom of the airplane and say, I've got no documentation. I'm a refugee because I've written something or I've done something. And the government goes, okay. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of government interest, but there's an awful lot of security interest. And we're following these people around. We clearly have an understanding of the unusual nature of their lives because you have shown the CSIS reports or the RCMP reports that the guy comes into the country. He's got no income. He doesn't do anything. He's driving around in a Mercedes. He has 2 other Mercedes. He's bought 3 houses. And he's not filing any taxes, and that doesn't seem to raise enough red flags to get people involved. Why is that?
Well, first, I would underline what you said. The dumping or flushing your ID when you fly in from Thailand or South Korea or Hong Kong was absolutely a blueprint used by the big circle boys, including Betty Yan and other gangsters. I name Kwok Chun Tam as a person that does that. And Tam's case is one where I outlined that basically from the moment of arrival, he's noted by Vancouver police as an aggressive and sort of powerful gangster already on the shores with no way to legally, verify his income. Report after report filed with CBSA and Immigration Canada. But you're right, the system just simply is either so roadblocked, so legally contorted, or in some cases so corrupted that people that have drug trafficking convictions, violent crimes surrounding them, cannot, in most cases, I would say, can't, even when facing deportation orders, are able, if they have enough money and good lawyers, just to appeal and appeal and appeal. And that's what has happened in Tam's case. Again, in the book, I started by looking at him, and I knew he was important, but I didn't know how important, and I didn't know he was still active in the Richmond casino until the Cullen Commission, which helpfully, added records where I was able to establish that he's connected to perhaps the largest cash money laundering transaction on record, $1 million within the course of about an hour coming into the Richmond casino.
It's angering. As I'm reading, when I was reading the book, I could feel it welling up inside me, being like, how could we be ignoring this? But again, that's a repeated element of your narrative. When you're looking at these reports, people are being deported, they never leave. They're kicked out of casinos, they're back in the next day. That everyone can clearly see what's going on. Pit bosses turn the other way. The bureaucracy at BC lottery casinos is intransient about the idea of being shaken down or turning any kind of attention on the multitudes of people who are using them for money laundering. It's quite impressive that it's almost as though Canada doesn't care on an official level. We have bureaucracies or institutions that are following it, but the actual ability to action on it the willingness doesn't seem to be there.
I would agree completely. And I think two things are going on. One is straight up good old fashioned willful blindness and corruption up to very high levels in BC's government. This is what I believe happened. This is what some people quoted in the book believe happened. And the other thing is just a complete, in some ways, I believe it relates to willful blindness of at a high level, Canada ignoring very suspicious money coming in, most specifically from China and Iran, into large cities, Vancouver and Toronto. Montreal is in there as well, because it's good for real estate and it's good for the economy. And there, I believe, more deeper, perhaps corrupt reasons around that as well. But that is related to what many people told me are just incredibly outdated laws in Canada, where it's almost impossible to go after high-level organized crime because we don't have something like a RICO or a anti-racket.
Oh, I think we may have just lost our panelist. Sam, are you there?
Adrian, can you hear me?
I can hear you. You're back.
I'm so sorry. I had a freeze, and I really sorry. I don't know what's happening with my computer.
I thought you were busy implicating the Canadian government, and they'd come to get you.
I'm not sorry where my answer cut off, but basically I was saying that Canada needs anti-racketeering laws. Canada needs much more strong anti-money laundering laws. And I do believe that there's a level of institutional willful blindness that's involved. And I do believe, unfortunately, there's direct corruption involved in some cases, especially in BC.
Okay. So obviously, crime is not good and money laundering is not good, but the Canadian government has made a kind of, or numerous governments have made a kind of peace with it. As you point out, it's been good for business. We have inflows. It has helped real estate. Some of the money is obviously very legitimate. It's not a broad-based, you can't pay with one brush here. But we have brought in a criminal element. But for a lot of us, it probably doesn't feel like a big threat. These are triads. You do point out to the fentanyl crisis, which affects the United States certainly, but it affects Canadians as well. What are the reasons? What is the impact on real estate in Vancouver? What has this money laundering done to the price of real estate? How much money flows into real estate because of it? Why do we care about the real estate aspect of this?
Yeah, that's the perhaps $100 billion question. It's hard to quantify exactly how much the needle could have been moved on real estate through this underground banking system that I've detailed, that goes back to the late 80s and ramps up in the 90s and just hits overdrive from 2000, goes insane after 2010, and that leads up to where my reporting, I think, maybe blew the lid off this in 2017. But look, the best quantifier I have is I reported on a police study that implicated, in the high-end luxury market, just residential homes, the very highest end, 3 million to 35 million, RCMP found 10% of those transactions, that is over $1 billion in 1 year, 2016, were connected to these exact high-end criminal networks that are essentially running money laundering and running the fentanyl trade in Vancouver. Not all fentanyl traffickers, but some very related to corruption, financial fraud. But the common aspect was the high net worth inflow of cash coming in from China, as I detailed in that little FinTrack bullet point earlier, and the connectivity to this underground banking network that uses casinos most brazenly and egregiously, but also uses shell companies, law firms, import-export. And so just to break it down, 1 billion in just the highest of high-end Vancouver real estate 1 year, 2016. And so I've roughly estimated it's easily tens of billions has been laundered in drug money in Vancouver real estate. I would say, confidently say, it can easily be over 100 billion. And, that's sort of the starting point. Again, an official study indicated 5 billion in 1 year in Vancouver real estate money laundering. So that gives you some indication of the quantity. But as I showed in one of the cases in the book, I call it a known known. This, let me put it this way. I now know this was the highest end VIP gambler in BC casinos, a known precursor importer according to the CBSA, and yet his gambling transactions were not stopped in BC casinos. And I tied him to extremely high-end money laundering of residential homes in Vancouver and West Vancouver. He's directly named as one of the bosses of this cartel that I identify, whether it's the Big Circle Boys or what's known as the Company, just the highest end organized crime in the Pacific region, extremely active in Vancouver. So when they are connected to 10% of the transactions in the luxury market, they're absolutely juicing those homes, paying, remember, you're laundering money. You don't care what you pay. You want to pay more in some cases. So when we saw the market go insane and these loan sharks or narcos were paying, prices jumped up on a West Side mansion from 5 million maybe in 2012 to 11 million in 2016, there really was a dominant buyer involved, and that was the buyer connected to these underground banking networks. That's the sort of the anecdotal and sort of big picture flowchart picture I can put on it, and then I've quantified it with the police study pointing to 1 billion in the high end in 1 year.
It's incredible. So let's talk a little bit about what the real estate's used for, and I want to go back to Lai Zhangjing, and he opened a casino. But it was not a casino, it's an underground casino. He bought a large mansion. They did $600,000 of work to it, you said, knew everything. And then he built a separate building that had bedrooms and I think there was 18 car spots outside. And really what he was doing was he turning a house into an underground casino or a gambling den. And I read that and I was midway through the book and I'm reading about how he's done this. And I think to myself, boy, that sounds a lot like a bust that happened in Markham earlier this year. And sure enough, later in the book, that's in there too. So the model that, can you talk a little bit about what's happened there and then this more recent thing that happened here in Ontario, not out west, but here in Markham, where the police busted up a similar model, a similar underground gambling house?
I would say you have good indicator instincts because you're exactly right. The Markham 53-room mansion is believed to be connected to these networks of transnational crime based in Chinese cities and becoming very strong, especially in Richmond and Markham, Ontario. But just to loop back to Lai Changxing, when I found those records in Ottawa court files that he had started this mansion casino in the farmland of Richmond back in around 2000. And then I put that together with my knowledge of these massive mansion farmhouses in Richmond and what they're connected to, according to the files that I reported on in the book. I was blown away by how long this crime model has been in effect, and that Lai had a virtual hookup between Macau casinos and his illegal casino in a Richmond mansion. He was running prostitution out in the Cabana House, as you indicate, the parking stalls for 15 to 18 cars. And this has been happening now for at least, going by Lai's case, 20 years. But I'm told and believe, back to the early, let's say the mid 90s is when that mansion casino underground trend really takes off. There's a lot of surveillance of Lai driving around to similar mansions all around Vancouver, and he was running one. And Betty Yan, now deceased, was a loan shark and guest. Kwok Tam, according to surveillance, a guest. So all the heavyweights of the Big Circle boys there, and all these same elements, I want to loop it back to what you saw in the Red Mansion. That is Lai Chang-zin's major corruption palace back in Fujian province. Same activities, gambling, prostitution, videotapes rolling. I believe probably the same thing occurring in Richmond. That is, the espionage and corruption, bribery potential aspect could have been relevant in Richmond too. Let's leap forward to what happened in Markham. That case, of course, there was a late development. It's claimed that perhaps police might have planted something, or that the accused may have lost a $350,000 French watch to someone with sticky fingers from the police. Look, I talked to police and prosecutors. That case is ongoing, so no one jumped to conclusions on that. But I can tell you that that is believed to connect to probably the highest level Asian organized crime network in the world. That kind of casino activity in Markham and Richmond.
That's his name is Wei Wei, isn't it? The gentleman in Markham.
The accused who no longer faces charges, another person still faces charges, and Wei Wei's wife no longer faces charges in that case.
So here's because for the benefit of people who are going to be watching this or watching it now and watching it later, I want to just take a few seconds because I looked that up. I was so interested in the fact that there was this duplication and down to the line. I mean, that it's a house, it's a big house. They're running digital casinos. There's probably prostitution being run there. When the
cryptocurrency involved. So that was exactly the innovation from 2021. That wasn't around when Lai was doing his thing, but the virtual hookup to Macau was.
Yeah. And I guess digital currencies only help these guys move money even more easily. But without getting too distracted by that, the situation way the police busted in and they found multiple loaded guns, which would definitely have been a violation. There was an AR-15 that was fully loaded. None of that is in question. The charges against Wei Wei have been dropped. The charges against his wife, for facilitating it, have been dropped. They're accusing the Markham police or the police force of stealing 2 watches worth in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that they've planted a gun holster in his bedroom to try and tie him to the guns that were found around the house, because the guns that were found around the house apparently have nothing to do with him. And this is the kind of stuff. I'm not a legal expert. I'm some Canadian, but if you put it into an episode of Law and Order, I'd be like, I don't know, guys, it's a bit on the nose, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't sound plausible, but that's the situation. You've been running an illegal casino, probably with prostitution. You have illegal weapons on the compound. There will be no charges faced by this person, at least as it currently stands.
There will be no charges. I believe he has forfeited the some $1 million seized, and he is under a peace bond or something to the effect. And I'm quite sure no one is alleging that police planted a 300-pound baccarat table that was found inside the mansion. I pick up on the sense of ridicule in your voice, because I think this points exactly into what I was saying about the need for RICO laws in Canada. But I'll let you continue. I think you're on that track. That there's more here to than a crafty lawyer sort of pointing to some watches and a holster, I believe.
Where are we going to? I mean, we're very likely. The rumor is that the writ will be dropped for an election this Sunday, which will be the 15th, is the rumor. Canadians are going to face an election. Typically, this would just be a conversation for the benefit of my clients, so they understand a little bit more about how financial markets work and some of the abuses that can that can affect it and how this impacts us. But we have an election potentially coming up. What would you say if someone's door knocking in their neighborhood and they've watched what you've had to say, or they pick up your book? What should they tell a potential elected representative what they want to see changed?
Of course, I've got a bit of a dog in the fight, but I believe I'm being, as one of my hedge fund friends in the States would say, right and righteous here. I do think that what I've uncovered or detailed explicitly in the book should be a key election issue. And why do I say that? Because again, I'm talking to some powerful people in governments around the world, maybe, let's just say United States. They're concerned about erosion of governments in third world countries, but they are starting to look at concerns of complicity in a major bulk cash money laundering scheme. Just as an example, in British Columbia, was the government looking the other way? This would fit with sort of the erosion of rule of law and regulatory systems. The erosion, indeed, I say, when you have transnational crime, experts would say part of the game here is eroding the country where it's active. If you're talking about Russia, China, and Iran, countries that it's not just me saying it, that experts say where high level intelligence and government officials do use organized crime. Part of the game is using organized crime to erode democracy in the West. And I would say that I know that quite a few people by Canadian standards have bought and are reading the book. And I do believe these are important findings. And I'd underline that they're certainly being noticed by powerful agencies outside of Canada in our allies.
And so I think that's good feedback. I'm going to open it up to questions. If we have a few people who were tuning in live, and if they'd like to ask a question, I'm going to let them do that. I am curious to know what your thoughts are if we do start to get real traction on tackling this. What do you think could happen to our real estate market when it comes to, with all the money that's flowed into it? If our government takes a real look at this and starts deciding that some of this is not legitimate, what could happen to the real estate market going forward?
That's a question I've thought of a lot, and it's almost related to the question of how much. It's directly related to the question of how much has the narco economy moved the needle in Vancouver's real estate. I'm arguing and asserting it's moved it a great deal. So all else equal, you would think that if Canada, gets a RICO Act, gets serious money laundering seizure laws, uh, even beyond that, if we really start to deal with a geopolitical decoupling or a Cold War between these two superpowers, and Canada has to go along with what these agencies in the United States I'm talking about want to see, that is, you don't let corrupt flows from China and Iran power into underground economies in Toronto and Vancouver, there has to be a significant impact on real estate in both cities. But I would add that, and I think you and some of your listeners probably have a lot better sense, but I sort of have the sense that a monster was created in Vancouver real estate over 30 decades with this form of underground banking that took root, and the Macau Vancouver model. And yet at some level, it seems to me sort of Canadian banking and shadow banking has picked up the baton in a way to support where those price levels got to. When you saw prices go up, 30, 40, 50% in a year or two in certain neighborhoods, certainly I think that illicit activity may have slowed down a bit after the exposure of the Cullen Commission. I believe to an extent, but it seems that there's still there's now sort of we're into the COVID era where governments are printing money and banks have more money to lend. So it's hard to say if that won't be able to pick up the baton in some ways.
Well, that's maybe a good point to draw a line under. I don't see any questions coming in at the moment. Sam, was there anything that we should have covered today that you always feel that you want to talk about before we part ways here?
Well, let me just again quote from one of the people, the former investigators that was really a part of this massive e-pirate investigation. he eventually testified in the Cullen Commission, and this is what he said. Essentially, his testimony was after 2010, he was shocked to see, I believe, 6 or 7 Mexican cartels had an extremely strong presence in Vancouver. El Chapo's godson flew into town and was soon after trailed, very soon after trailed over meeting a Middle Eastern organized crime subject. Both the Mexican and Iranian cartels were using the Chinese triad underground banks to launder this money around the world. So Krusty said that this Vancouver had become an absolute global node for fentanyl trafficking and global money laundering, and yet Canada doesn't have the legal framework. And beyond that, again, there was complicity, corruption. So what he said in the commission, I would say his money quote, "We're open to corruption by having this illicit money moving through our financial systems and our casinos, and our regulators having oversight of that, and ministers' offices knowing this," Krusty testified. And I was concerned from 2012 to 2015, what has changed? Why continue to take this money? Because it was somewhat obvious to everybody in 2012 the money was illicitly generated. So I thought the public deserved to know, and everyone deserved to have the transparency of what the police were seeing. So a big argument in my book is because this cases like Markham fall apart, because ePirate fell apart, and the accused a year or two later are subject of a targeted shooting in Richmond that in a restaurant where families could have died. There's no justice here, clearly. And so the police see what's happening. They see how bad the situation is. And if it's not coming out in the courts, it had to come out in my book. And that's my bottom line.
Well, Sam, thank you very much for joining me today. It's a real pleasure. I recommend, I've been reading the book. I think it's wonderful. And if anyone's interested, I'm happy to help get a copy into their hands. Thank you for joining us. It's an interesting, surprising story on an aspect of Canada that touches on all of us for our for finances, as well as our real estate market, but also puts us in danger and has wider implications. So thank you very much for being here today. I will add as well, in 2 weeks on the 26th, we'll be joined by Matt Gurney of formerly the National Post to talk a bit about the Canadian government and some of the aspects of the pandemic that we should maybe be taking lessons from. But Sam, thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you everybody for tuning in.
Thanks, Adrian. I think you've got a real handle on the book. And again, sorry that my connection cut off there in the middle.
Not a problem. Have a great day. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.